Hello, everyone, and welcome to Discovery Speaker Series hosted by the Puget Sound Estuarium. My name's Clarissa, and I'll be your host for this evening. Discovery Speaker Series is meant to be an event for you to help spark conversations in our community. So if you do have any questions at all, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we will get to them at the end. But if you saw in our outreach posts and in the Zoom email, we did want you to think about a question beforehand. So if you don't remember that question, I'll repeat it here. We want to know if there are ways in which you, your family, or friends live with a disability or health concern, and what you or they need to be outside. So if you want to type in the chat, or you can answer anonymously in the Q&A, any health concerns or disabilities that you, family, or friends face, and what ways that we can do to help you get outside. So as hopefully some of you are typing those answers in, you can say nothing that comes to mind, or you can say everything that comes to mind. But some housekeeping is that we do have that coloring page drawn by one of our volunteers for you to do during the talk to keep busy with your hands. And then if you do have to leave early, or you know someone who would really enjoy listening to this presentation, we will be recording it and it will be posted to the Puget Sound Estuarium's YouTube channel. You'll probably see it there in the next couple of days. But tonight, we are so happy to have Virginia Rose, founder and board president of Birdability. Birdability is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to inclusive, safe, and accessible outdoor birding. They do this by improving accessibility to birding locations, introducing people with access challenges to birding, and empowering them to form birding communities. So thank you so much, Virginia, for joining us tonight to share your story and vision. Feel free to get started whenever you are ready. Oh, you're muted.
All right, and thank you so much, Clarissa. Has anyone ever told you you sound like an NPR person?
No, thank you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let me get to the beginning. All right. All right, so also want to thank the Puget Sound Estuarium for having me. I am Virginia Rose, founder of Birdability, and I'm honored to be here tonight. So our goals tonight are to gain a basic understanding of why accessibility matters. It's for our donors, our staff, our visitors, and ultimately we'll find it's for every one of us. The other goal is to inspire decision makers, and you are one, to identify and remove barriers where possible and provide greater access for everybody. And create a welcoming and inclusive, that is, a safe birding environment for the well-being of all. In 1973, I was 14 years old. Hold on here. In 1973, I was 14 years old when I was paralyzed in a horse riding accident, and I've used a manual wheelchair ever since. 30 years later, at age 44, I found birding, and life changed. I should have come to it sooner. My grandmother birded into her 90s. My mom is still birding at age 88. She and I got a life bird together a year and a half ago at the Santa Rita Lodge in Arizona, southeastern Arizona. It was the berry-line hummingbird. Birding gave me a purpose, a reason to be outside again, to explore nature, and as it turns out, discover my best self and my greatest happiness. I remember calling my mom and asking her, "Why didn't you tell me I was a nerd? My life would have been so much easier." Maybe some of you can relate to that. What's funny, of course, is that doing anything new in a wheelchair is not especially easy. Let's look at some of the difficulties. Starting with parking. If there is parking, seldom is it disabled parking, and even more seldom does it include a space for a van. Gates. Gates are notorious. Some are manageable. Some I can duck under. Some I can go around, but many times gates are obstacles. Railings. Railings too are many times perfectly constructed to obstruct my view. I oftentimes am trying to just find a view through these railings, through these wires. So we have to think about railings as a way to help people see instead of being obstructed. Bathrooms, if there are some, they are seldom accessible. Steps and curbs, mud, sand, ruts, rocks, gravel, cattle guards, cactus spines, and cow patties. We're talking Texas, of course. Cattle guards, I'm sure you know what those are. And I am the only person in a wheelchair that I know who can or even would do something as stupid as try to cross a cattle guard. Cactus spines is sort of self-explanatory with tires. And cow patties. I bring up cow patties because when you are chasing mountain plovers in pastures, when you're walking, you can get cow patties on your boots, but cow patties in your hands is a whole nother matter. All of these difficulties end up creating a lack of independence. But on the other side of difficulties, and that's why they're important, right on the other side is empowerment and joy. When things get hard, can we start asking, what will the empowerment be? What joy will come of this? It's well known that many of our greatest joys and accomplishments are preceded by difficulty and challenge. I used to tell my students, don't expect your greatest accomplishments to happen in your comfort zone. At the end of the day, I do not just come home with a list of birds and happy memories. I come home with a very real feeling of accomplishment and pride. I come home empowered. And it's why I say no one can predict what an individual with an access challenge can or cannot do. Not even that individual. Take it from me. I never know what I can do until after I do it, which leads us to the joys. Friendships, travel, physical health, confidence, independence, community, lifelong learning, and lifelong purpose. And these two things, I am quite sure, have an awful lot to do with happiness. And of course, the birds and all these joys equal empowerment. Birding has brought me the greatest joys of my life, But after 20 years of birding, I saw no other people with mobility challenges on the trail. Where were they? I determined they must just not know about birding. In 2018, I decided to find them and introduce them to birding so they too could find their greatest happiness, which led me to the mission. The mission is to share the joys of birding with people who have access challenges, to help make birding locations accessible and birding communities welcoming and inclusive. Realize that these three things must work in tandem. I wanted you to see the mission in a visual. Realize that we have to create birding locations that are physically accessible. But if we do that, but we have not introduced people with access challenges to birding, then we have not met our mission. And if we have introduced people with access challenges to birding, but we have not created a welcoming and inclusive birding community, we have not met our mission. So these three things have to be working at all times. First, let's ask, why do accessible trails even matter? Everyone here today well understands the healing powers of nature. We know that it's nourishing. We know that it helps us in our mental health. What you may not know, though, is that the benefits are even more important for disabled people. The disabled lack the same access to nature, experience, and education. Exposure to nature decreases anxiety, depression, and negative rumination. Exposure to nature increases well-being and creative problem solving. There's ample evidence that time in nature provides a range of physical, emotional, and mental benefits and can enhance a sense of belonging. Yet the people who need these benefits the most, the disability community, are often excluded from the outdoors. Physical limitations, finances, fear, and anxiety experienced by the disabled further serve to exclude their participation in the outdoors. One of the more in-depth studies of autism and nature connection showed that when autistic children regularly engage in outdoor activities, they experienced movement improvements in 7 key areas: social interaction, communication, behavior, emotion, cognition, sensory issues, and physical activity. Time in nature consistently improved a child's emotional state and increased their cognitive ability. Experiencing nature is one of the best ways children with disabilities can increase their self-awareness. For the disabled, the ultimate goal is self-reliance. This is my favorite reason. Having gained the knowledge and confidence to enjoy nature on their own, creating the ability and desire to experience nature is a lifetime tool. So now we know why it matters. Who benefits from accessible birding sites? So who are our users? Who are our users? We would say people with mobility challenges, people with blindness, chronic illness, with intellectual or developmental disabilities, mental illness, those who are neurodivergent, deaf, or who have other health concerns. But that's not all. We also focus on life stages. Parents with strollers, grandparents with toddlers, older people done with the bushwhacking, people with new medical diagnoses, folks with new or grumpy joints. This is our future selves. I think one of the most important epiphanies I had was when I realized that birdability is only for people who age. meaning every single one of us is going to want a bird in our 70s and into our 80s and into our 90s. And the way to do that is to prepare and create environments where we can age. What we know that time spent in nature is good for us. We know birds can be the gateway. We know that birding is the fastest growing leisure activity in the US. 45 million Americans in 2022. 1 in 4 Americans has a disability, including 36 million with a mobility challenge, 19 million who are deaf or hard of hearing, and 16 million who are blind or have low vision. I like to look at these numbers in a new way also. I like to think about all of these Americans who are not yet conservationists. This is a lot of conservationists in the wings, you guys. Don't forget, this is about our future selves. Now let's talk about access considerations. Parking, of course, first. I've pictured a van space here for you so you can get an idea about those of us who have ramps that come out of the passenger sides of our vans. That requires 8 feet of space, 6 feet for the ramp, 2 feet for the landing spot. So I'm just giving you an idea about what it is a person with a van needs, what those requirements are. If there's not a van space with ample dismount areas, then I'm not going to be able to park. I also want you to notice trail information ahead of time is one of the most important ways to be accessible. Information ahead of time. So I wanted to give you an example of a really great sign. Notice that this sign indicates the length of the trail, the surface of the trail, the tread width, the grade of the trail, and the slope of the trail. All this information can become very important for any disabled person who has these particular concerns. So information ahead of time is the easiest way to be welcoming and inclusive. Next, bathroom accessibility. This is I wanted to include this picture because this is a great example of porta potties. Porta potties that are behind these yellow pipes are called bollards. I don't know if anybody knew that. I just learned that. Bollards. Sounded to me like a British cuss word, but I was assured that no, instead these are metal poles that are trying to keep cars and sometimes wheelchairs out of the area. So keep in mind that these can be obstacles if they are not wide enough. Notice also that where these porta potties are located, I'm thinking about how is a person in a wheelchair going to open this door all the way out, and is there enough space to make that entrance and that exit? Also realize that if you're going to have to rent a porta potty and you can only rent one, please rent one that is accessible. Also wanted you to notice the importance of signage. Interpretive signs can be the only way that a person with a disability is able to perceive his or her environment. Notice that in this right-hand corner is a tactile element. This may be the only way a person who has low vision or a person who cannot reach a trunk to touch it may know what, say for instance, a sycamore bark might feel like. Notice also the height of this sign and the angle at which it's placed so that seated people can read it. Notice also that it's on the pad, it's on the cement pad. That means that I can wheel directly up to the sign to read it. I want you to also notice the sound box to the right. This is all of the information that you see here, but through an audio. And that might be the only way that a person who is blind or has low vision can get the same information. Next, I wanted us to look at steps or other obstacles. I thought this was a really great picture because I'm sure walking people themselves might have trouble stumbling over all these roots and ruts and rocks, but for wheelchairs, that's impossible. I also wanted to say that people everywhere will hold their hands up when I ask them, are there any steps? And they'll say, well, there's just this little, and they all do that. At which point I realized that means I probably cannot do that trail. So we have to just help everybody understand that a step is a step is a step. Also notice bird blinds. This looks like a relatively accessible bird blind, doesn't it? You see a lowered viewing window, which is fabulous. That's definitely making progress. You also see let's see, I think there may be one or two other windows in this bird blind that are low to the ground. But what you might not realize is that it looks like this surface here is mulch or loose dirt, which means that I would not be able to go in there and use the viewing window because wheels in mulch and loose dirt don't work together very well. So many things to consider. Next, I didn't realize that maintenance was an access issue, but it sure is. Like this is a perfectly accessible ramp and platform, but not if it's covered in snow and ice. Maintenance, then, put it on our list as something to consider when we're talking about access. Railings, I mentioned those earlier. This is a great example of a feature where a section of the railing has been removed and replaced with like a plexiglass. So this means that I have access to the view that everybody else has. I'm not, my vision isn't obscured with a railing or wooden slats. Notice also I can wheel sideways up to this window and look straight down at the ground. And that's usually where the olive sparrow is lurking. So also wanted you to think about how important these viewing plexiglass sections are for kids. It's something to realize that when we're making a trail accessible, it's being made accessible for kids too. Notice the bench here. Benches are a very important part of making a site accessible. I think the ADA's recreational design requires a bench every 1/8 of a mile, and they would like to have at least one armrest on the bench in order to help provide some stability for people who use them. All right, so next, the most accessible way to address, the easiest way to address accessibility is through access to information. According to the National Environment Education Foundation, in its piece, Cultivating an Environmentally Conscious and Responsible Public, one of the most important barriers to public lands that people without disabilities might not recognize starts with website accessibility. All right, now I want to show you the famous Birdability map. Let me tell you how it came about. In 2019, I was doing a presentation for National Audubon at their convention in Milwaukee. And in that presentation, I dreamed out loud about taking a road trip and going from one accessible park to another, to another, to another, all around the country. I knew that I had identified 30 accessible parks in Austin, and I knew that there were accessible parks all over the country, but I didn't know where they were. And how wonderful would it be if there were a map with all of those accessible sites on it? And at the end of my presentation, 2 GIS designers approached me and said, we can do that. And I said, what? And they know, no, we can do that. We are going to take your questions about access, turn them into a survey, and we will make a crowdsourced map. Within the first year, you guys, there were 1,000 sites on it. There are over 1,500 sites on the Birdability map now. It is a road trip, making it happen next year, I hope. Let me take you a little closer in. I'm on my website. I've gone to the Birdability map. I am clicking now on the map and giving us an idea about where we can find accessible birding. So the first thing I want to do right now is show you all of the Birdability sites in this country, and come back here, and hold on, sorry, and in 15 other countries. So you see a site in Spain, you see 2 sites in Greece, you see one in the UK, you see one in, I have all kinds of places. Where are they? Ecuador, Costa Rica, Spain, Australia, Austria, Germany, Brazil, and more. Let's get back to the US and let's head into your direction. I'm going to click on these blue diamonds, the one I want in the area. And the more I click, the closer we get to Seattle. And now I'm going to click even farther in. And then you'll see on the right side, the trail information. This is the Washington Park Arboretum Trail. And someone has already been to this park and they have written down all the assessments and you can see them here. So for instance, if you're new to the Seattle area and you have a disability and you're interested in finding an accessible park, voila, there it is. You can scroll down through the general information. You can find out the link. You can find out how long it is. The length of the trail is 2 miles. You scroll down and there's information. Is there parking available? Yes. Are there van spaces? Yes. The surface is paved? Yes. Are there bathrooms? Hallelujah. There's wheelchair accessible portable restrooms. Look at this. Are there ramps? Yes. Trail surfaces, asphalt, concrete, hard packed soil. I'm there. This is such vital information for people who have various disabilities. What I want you to realize is that there's no way any one of us can be an expert in the areas of access for all different disabilities. That's impossible. Nobody can do that. But what you can do is look at the categories and simply answer them objectively. You are only required to provide information, not to be an expert. And then a person with his or her own disability makes his or her own decision after looking at the information you've provided. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing, and it actually is happening. Okay, so I am now going to, let's see, click out of this, and I'm going to scroll down and show you how to submit a Birdability site. When you look at a site and you decide you want to go ahead and answer those questions, you can go to your computer and you'll see the name of the birding location or a blank for the birding location, and you can just go ahead and put it in there, type it in there. It would be Washington Park. Then you can put in the link for the park. Then you can drop a pin at the location of the trailhead. There are some directions on how to do that. Then you go through and start answering the very simple questions. Is this a good car birding site? Yes or no? Is what is the length of the trail? What is the type of the trail? What about an entrance fee? Is there nearby access to public transportation? Is there walking or biking access? All of this is vital information for certain people who are working with their own disabilities. The questions about available parking, the questions about handicap spaces, surfaces, whether there's a visitor center or not, whether there are volunteers to assist with questions, whether meals are available, whether water fountains are available. All of this is important information. I want to click out of this now and show you something that I know you are all wishing you already had, which is a site checklist that is printable. You can take it with you. I also wanted just you to see it because I wanted you to see how well these categories show up. This is something printable. You take it with you and you see, okay, part 2 is about parking. And then you see this next section is about services available. The next section is about bathrooms. The next section is about ramps, and then trail surfaces, trail widths, steps, railings, benches, features for visitors who are blind, bird blinds, is there shade, trail use, on and on, maintenance, noise. And then there's the last part is just final thoughts for you to add any sort of subjective information that might be helpful. But what I want you to notice here is that this is just a checklist, and you can take it with you when you go. You can come back to your computer at home and complete that, and then you will be able to say you have actually pinned a site. All right, so now that we have talked about this, I'm going to come back to my PowerPoint and then go on to the next section. All right. This is a picture. I don't know if anybody recognizes this woman. Her name is Caroline Paul, and she has done a TED Talk about instilling bravery in our girls. And she's written a book called Tough Broad. And Birdability and we are in a chapter in her book. And so this was a picture of her when she came to visit us when we did a birdathon here in Travis County a couple springs ago. All right, so now the question is, now what? We know why access matters. We know what access is. Now, of course, we have to find people with access challenges. We have to do some outreach. An accessible birding site does a disabled person no good if he or she doesn't know about it. Where can we find people with disabilities in our communities? Where would you even begin? I began by going to local disability support groups. I went to the spinal cord injury support group and I asked the facilitator if I could do a presentation. She said, sure. I came, I spoke for about 15 minutes and I got contact information from people who were interested. Then I went to the amputation support group, same thing. Then I went to the multiple sclerosis group, same thing. Stroke survivors. Pretty soon then I have a list of 10 or 12 people who are willing to learn how to bird. Next, adult neurodiversity groups. Kids disabled camps. Perfectly set up, right? The camp is already set up for disabled folks. Now we just need to get binoculars in their hands. Veteran services, paralyzed veterans, wounded warriors, all of these folks can benefit from being outside on accessible trails. Special education services in public schools. These guys are always looking for outdoor activities. The Autism Society, rehab hospitals and gyms. So for instance, I went to a rehab group called Rehab Without Walls. And this is an ingenious new type of therapy, physical therapy, where you're outside in your happy places doing your therapy. So it may be at a bowling alley, it may be at a shooting range, it may be on a birding trail like mine was. And so the therapists bring their outpatients to accessible trails. Once I told them about it, quarterly they brought their outpatients there, and they would meet me on accessible trails and go birding. Schools for the deaf and blind, assisted and independent living centers, Brookdale Retirement Community here in Austin has a van that can take some of their residents to accessible trails, and quarterly walks were set up, and they loved it. They loved being out. Scouting and 4-H groups, another really important source for us in finding people who have disabilities who need to be outside birding. And there's an adaptive sports organization in every city. Every single city, you'll find a group that helps people who have various disabilities get outside. And these organizations can be your next best friend. All right. Next, how to create welcoming and inclusive organizations. First, we're going to enlarge the definition of birding. How many of you have met people who say, well, I'm not a birder. They get very, intimidated, and they'll put their hands up on, well, I'm not a birder. And I can't really say I'm birding, but so you hear them, with all these sort of caveats. And that's exactly the sort of establishment that we want to dismantle. So instead, we want to say that the definition of birding is simply the act of enjoying wild birds. Full stop. It occurs in so many forms, including, but not limited to, looking and listening, moving down a trail, sitting inside a bird blind or other structure, sitting outside from a moving vehicle, via a computer, or with binoculars, with in-depth knowledge of bird ID, or with very limited knowledge of bird identification, independently or with others. And we are redefining birding too. Bird watcher, because not everyone is able to watch, we're now using the word birder. If we're just talking about language, ways in which we talk about birding and to people about birding, we can be more welcoming and more inclusive if we watch the littlest things. Bird walk instead is called a bird outing, a bird field trip, or a bird event. I have to very quickly tell you that a little story about me is I've been in a wheelchair 50 years, and I've always called it a bird walk. And so when I was leading events, I always called them bird walks. And then my friends who are walking people said, you can't call it a walk anymore. And I'm like, what? You, a walking person, are telling me, a not walking person, that I can't use the word walk? And they said, that's right. So I stumble every now and then. And I myself am working on changing this word bird to bird outing, bird event, or birding field trip. Also, we are working with different wording. So handicapped. I was raised to not like the word, or to like the word handicap. Remember that I was in a wheelchair in the 70s, the 80s, 90s. And so I didn't have any trouble with this word. But now I understand that handicap is a no-no word, and that now people are using the word disability as more PC. And I have my own sort of cringe when I hear the word disabled. I always say to myself, I'm the most able-bodied person I know, considering. So the point here is there's not one language fits all. We have to realize that whoever has a disability can tell you what he or she wants to hear. And we have to be listening for that. Everybody is going to have their own idea of how they're going to identify. We do want to stop using the word normal, however, And we do want to work on instead using words like able-bodied. If someone can see, we may say they are sighted. If someone can hear, we may say they are hearing. And if someone is not neurodivergent, we might say they are neurotypical. And instead of wheelchair bound, and I know you all have an idea of me wrapped with rope in my wheelchair all the way up to my head, and people are still using this word. Wheelchair bound suggests that we never can get out of it. My students once asked me, "Do you sleep in your wheelchair?" I was like, no. Wheelchair user, we start using the word wheelchair user, and I use the word seated a lot. And instead of saying vision impaired, we say a person who is blind or has low vision. Something very interesting I learned, and tell me what you think about this, is person first language suggests that a disability is insulting. It originated by temporarily able-bodied people fighting stigma. They perceived disability as dehumanizing. So they would say a girl with autism, a person with disability, a boy who is deaf. Notice person first language, all suggesting that being disabled is dehumanizing. Then there was a change to something called identity first language. It's embraced by many disabled folks, suggesting that the word disabled is a perfectly acceptable way to identify. It is not offensive. It is not a deficiency. Instead, using identity first language is an indication of culture and identity. So for instance, they're perfectly happy with and prefer an autistic girl, a disabled person, a deaf boy. So their disabilities are used as adjectives first, suggesting that there's absolutely nothing wrong with starting a sentence with the disability. Isn't that interesting? All right, next, welcoming and inclusive organizations. They create an inclusivity and diversity statement. They hold employees, volunteers, and organizations accountable. These organizations hold accessible birding outings as part of their regular program. They include accessibility information. These organizations include image descriptions for social media posts. They include closed captions for all webinars and meetings, even if no one has asked for them. Remove financial barriers to access whenever possible. And provide honorariums for speakers and consultants who use their lived experience as education. Things that we can start doing today. We can be familiar ahead of time with the physical accessibility of every outing location. And remember, you can do that very easily with your printed checklist. Post pertinent access info ahead of time. Include a welcome statement at the beginning. A welcoming statement includes name, pronouns, and an invitation to share any access needs. So for instance, when I lead these walks, these events, these outings, I will start by saying, my name is Virginia Rose, my pronouns are she, her, and I am a paraplegic. I've been in a wheelchair 50 years. I probably don't need any help, but stand by. This is a way for other people who are listening to do the same, to feel comfortable giving their pronouns, to feel comfortable inviting their disability, and as a way to ask for help. Then there's the land acknowledgement, a great important way of letting people know that we are aware of first persons. Here is an example of one. And this one would go like this. I want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the names of the first people. So for instance, in Austin, it would be the Tonkawa, or in Cook County, the Council of Three Fires, Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. I wish to pay my respect to elders, both past and present, and offer our gratitude for their care for and teachings about our earth. When I first started using these land acknowledgements, it felt a little bit odd. But what I've discovered now is that people receive it almost as a blessing or a grace or just a window within which to begin our walk or our event. I really enjoy it now. And you do sort of see people, it registers with people. All right, other things we can start doing today. Review appropriate field trip etiquette, which is even more important. People with disabilities are participants. These are the things I reinforce at the beginning. Let leaders lead. And what I mean by that is that we want to make sure our leaders are in the front. And that just saying that helps people understand that they are to follow. Next, remind all that we are looking and listening on this outing. I say that because it's as important to hear the birds as it is to see them. And by making this point at the beginning, it helps curtail some of the chit chat. Of course, we're working with people here too, so we can't be Nazis. Next, suggest that wheelchair users stay close to leaders. And sometimes I say this because I want the walking people to hear that that's where the seated people will be. Realize that wheelchair users have different sight lines when getting people on the bird or on anything else. So for instance, the leader may see the bird and then describe where the other people can see it. But the person in a wheelchair their vision may be obscured by a bush. They may be too low. They may be too whatever. So just be mindful that in order to get the person in the wheelchair on the bird, you may have to go and stand behind them. Also, reinforce the importance of moving behind and not in front of people who are using binoculars. You would be amazed at how easy it is for walking people to walk in front of people who are in wheelchairs. Realize you are modeling important etiquette for other participants who are perhaps not disabled. All right, learning basic disability etiquette. We are in the process of doing that. Speak directly to the disabled person, not to his or her companion. I can't tell you how many times I go somewhere and there's a complete stranger standing behind me. The clerk assumes that we are together because a person in a wheelchair would not be alone, and talks to the person behind me and says, "What can I do for you today?" And I'm like, "You can," and I put my hand up and try to do it in a funny, graceful way instead of a critical way. So speak directly to the disabled person. Offer assistance at the outset. If it's accepted, ask how to help. If assistance is not accepted, respect the independence and say, "Okay, just ask if you change your mind." Don't touch a wheelchair without permission. That said, all of my older friends now depend on my wheelchair to stand up after they have knelt down, not talk to me or see a bird. Also, if you would normally shake someone's hand, do so in this situation for people in wheelchairs. One caveat: my very good friend, when I first met him, Eric, was sitting in a power wheelchair, and his arms were on his arm rests and his hands were on the armrests. And I, of course, introduced myself and then, in all my ignorance, put my hand out to shake his. And he said, "I can't shake hands." And he smiled, and I was like horrified that I had made such a faux pas. But you know what? This is what we learn. This is what we realize when we're out, that we learn how we can be with various disabilities. Anyway, just be mindful. So what I would say at the end then is that the best we can be is waiting for us in nature. And now let's talk about one actionable goal. What's one thing we know we can do right now or tomorrow or the next day to feel like we are putting something in action after learning about these things? Okay, I think the easiest and quickest thing to do is to complete a Birdability map site review for a location you think may be accessible. Do it with your friend so the two of you can walk through a park and see it with fresh eyes. Also, share whatever site reviews you do with a peer, just so that the two of you together are going to be learning what is and isn't accessible. All right, and so in the end, this is my mom. I wanted to show you. This is my mom in her walker. And these are all these wonderful people, some of whom are in wheelchairs, some of whom have invisible disabilities, who joined us on the Birdability Walk in Arizona, or the Birdability event in Arizona. All right, thank you guys.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Virginia. That was so informative, especially as someone who also recently changed our bird walk to urban burden, so that
Oh, I love it. I love it. Urban burden.
But if anyone has any questions for Virginia, please feel free to type them in the Q&A. We do have one right off the bat. Any advice for a person with Parkinson's and a tremor for holding binoculars or something similar to see birds?
I'm glad you asked that. We are finding that for Parkinson's, or for anybody who may have a tremor, if you can find a place where you can sit and rest your elbows on a shelf that may be right in front of you and you're seated under it, the shelf can help with the tremor. It can stabilize it a little bit. I've also begun looking into the monocular, and the monocular might be even better for helping a person with a tremor get a more stable single view. So I would look into those two things, and I'm going to look and see myself if I can do a little research on that and maybe look for it on our website. Thanks for that.
Great. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to type them. We got another one. Are gravel paths difficult for wheelchair use? Does it matter on the gravel size, or is it always not great? And when you mentioned bark chips are not ideal, made them wonder about the gravel too.
Yes, well, I'm really glad you're thinking along those lines, because gravel is an enemy. And the thing about gravel is that when you try to wheel in it, you can't go anywhere. Your wheels don't get any purchase. And they do, the trail surfaces that work really well are called deconstructed. I think it's called deconstructed granite. And so what they do is they crush it. It's so that it's really small, and then they stabilize it so they can press it down even harder. So it's hard packed crushed granite. That's the ideal surface. Gravel is a no-no. I'm sorry. I know people love gravel, and like, well, you're gonna have to find another surface or else not have me there.
We definitely don't want that.
No.
Another question for you. Do you have any recommendations on outdoor or an all-terrain wheelchair?
I don't, but I've heard recently about the rover, and if maybe I can do a little research on the rover and get that information to you, Clarissa. But the rover is apparently a very successful way to move through whatever terrain it is really easily. Now, it does mean that you transfer from your chair into the rover, but there are places now that are having those rovers available. I know also that there are beach chairs. I don't know if you've seen those. Have you, Clarissa?
Yeah, one of our partner organizations got one and we're jealous of them.
Yes, and so I've been in a beach chair too. Again, I transferred out of my manual wheelchair into the beach chair, and then whoever the walking person is with me, they are going to be able to push. I don't think a beach chair is anything I myself could push, but it's still nice to be out there, that's for sure.
Is it okay for people to fill out one of the birding for the maps if it's not an accessible trail? Is that helpful?
Yes, I think it's as important to put down what is not accessible, because if I am new to the area and I look at that park and I don't see any comments about it being inaccessible, I will just go there. And then I will realize, oh, this is not an accessible place. So that's helpful too. Thank you for doing that.
Good to know. Anyone else have any final questions for Virginia? Well, if not, then I want to ask you that question again. Is that now learning all about accessibility and the fact that as we age, we may need some accessibility needs at our favorite birding locations. Has it sparked any changes to how you feel about what you or family or friends would need to get outside? If so, if you want to share that in the chat, we'd love to see if you had any eye-opening realizations. As an able-bodied person, I definitely did not realize that as I age and get older, it's going to be harder to move around if I don't stay active. And so making sure that my favorite locations to go out and explore are still going to be accessible as I get older.
Yay! Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Virginia, for spending your night with us talking
Sure.
about birdability and how we can all get involved.
Sure.
We can share that map with people as well so
Yes,
that they
please.
can fill out those check mark sheets. And then thank you all for joining us today to tune in and listen to the talk and ask those wonderful questions so we can spark those conversations.
And can I also just invite anybody to contact me if you have any other questions so that I can be helpful? And Clarissa knows where to find me. So I welcome any and all questions. And thank you.
I wonder, can you even access the chat? Whoops, my bad. I think you can access the chat now. I think someone raised their hand. I hope you all got to do your coloring pages throughout the presentation. I used some markers on mine. I did not have the exact colors I wanted, but I think it turned out pretty good. If you finish the coloring page, you can send it to us. We'd love to see them. Also, to get information about our next Discovery Speaker Series, you can either follow us on social media or you can sign up for our newsletter on our website. So you'll get a monthly email about upcoming events such as this one. If you tuned in a little late, or if you want to share this with someone else in your friend, family group, coworkers, it will be posted to the Puget Sound Estuarium's YouTube channel so that in the next couple of days, you'll probably see it and can share it. I hope that we can see you in person as well at the estuarium. We currently have our See Two Trees Celebration of Birds rotating exhibit, where we've got some bird specimens on loan from the Puget Sound Museum of Natural History, so you can actually see some of our local birds up close and personal. If you've tried birding outdoors and you have trouble finding them, this will be a great way to see them, so that way you can better spot them out in the wild, because we will be starting our bird events. We'll have our urban birding every other month, so you can join us on a walk or stroll around downtown Olympia as we look at how the history of Olympia has changed and affected the bird populations here, and some ways that restoration projects are in effect to bring back our local birds. And we'll be doing some citizen science as well, tracking the birds that we see, and maybe we'll bring that spreadsheet along to see if our walk is accessible. But thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we hope to see you at the next event.